Staying with us tonight. Now, a growing number of black corporate executives are locked in protracted legal battles with their former employers. These legal skirmishes, of course, playing themselves out in the public with no sign that there will be outright victors or even amicable solutions. Well, we're joined by the Employment Equity Commission Chairperson, Tabea Nkabinde, and the Business Unity South Africa President, Bonang Mohale. Good evening to both of you, and thank you for your time. Ms. Nkabinde, let me perhaps begin with you. I mean, as the Employment Equity, you're watching a lot of this from the distance. What do you make of it all?
What it's saying to us is that we are having a pandemic, as it's often called, that because of the fact that gender-based violence is prevalent in society as a whole, it then permeates and finds its way into corporate South Africa. And we cannot ignore it, because what happens in society is then manifested in companies, as it is a microcosm of the total society. So the fact that employers and employees find themselves in court on matters related to gender-based violence is quite alarming, and we believe that there needs to be ways in which we protect employees from this pandemic.
I imagine that you're referencing specifically the case involving Mr. Pityana, who has recently, of course, been fired from the APSA board. But more holistically, do you keep tabs in terms of the, black executives in corporate South Africa? We know that it's already such a small pool, but when they leave, do you keep tabs on why it is that they're leaving and the acronymy that seems to follow many of their leaving?
We do so on an informal basis because in terms of the work that we do, there isn't a formal system through which these cases are brought to the fore. So it's just the alertness of us as commissioners, as well as the department, to just stay abreast of what is happening in the world of work, and then to seek and to understand what the real issues are. Of course, when these cases land up in the CCMA and land up in the labor court, then they come to us and we get to know about them more and more. But if nothing happens of them, we sometimes don't even get to hear about them.
Mr. Mohale, let me bring you into the conversation, and again, an opportunity just for you to reflect more broadly on the issue we're discussing today.
Sediaka, thank you for having me. I think the other pandemic that we ought to be talking about is what the president is going to talk to us about 8 o'clock. So we can't pretend that that is not going to happen. So I had my first jab on the 11th of July. 42 days later, I had my second Pfizer jab. Therefore, I'm fully vaccinated. And on the 8th of the following month, of course, I had my vaccine certificate. So these black executives that we are talking about, if they love life as much as I do, they will make sure that they are indeed vaccinated. And we implore and mandate the president this evening that if anything that he wants to do about this Omicron virus is to ensure that the people who are not vaccinated, they are the ones that are self-quarantining. They can't go to watch their favorite sporting activity. They can't go to their places of work unless, of course, they can produce a PCR test that is less than 24 months at 850 rand a shot at their cost if they love life as much as we do. Talking about the second pandemic of gender-based violence and the black executives that are in court, and again, in general terms, you see, it can be emphasized enough that we can't talk of a just society when business is perceived to be at the apex of injustice. Tabea Nkabinde, on her 22nd anniversary of the Employment Equity Report, says that the representation of black executives in general has just increased from 14.3% to 14.7%, and yet black people represent 90% of the population. At this rate, it will take us 150 years for us to be broadly reflective of the demographics. Lastly, women are 51% of the population of 60.1 million South Africans. and yet their representation in the C-suite is less than 24%. African women are less than 4%. And yet we know the data is replete with evidence that when you put a smartphone in the hands of women, not only does the nutrition, education, and health of their own children improve, but that of society and community from which they come. Mekethy?
Ms. Nkabinde, why do these numbers still look the way that they do in terms of the inclusion of black people into these executive roles?
Well, to a large extent, I believe it has to do with who is in the decision-making seat. And if we look at who sits at those seats, it remains the boys' choir to a large extent, and it remains white representation that is at that level. And, you know, when you look and you talk to implementers as well as people in organizations, implementers of employment equity, what you hear is that the decision makers prefer to deal with that which is familiar to them, and they seek people that look like them. And that is also part of a problem that is caused by policies, procedures in organizations, that when we recruit, the recruitment process seeks to find people that are more like us. So when we look at minimum requirements, we specifically design the minimum requirements in such a way that the results that we get are the results that seek to satisfy what we are looking for. So to a large extent, there is an exclusion. There is a process of exclusion of people who are black and of women in the process of recruitment and of promotion, because decision makers consistently look for people who are like them. And though the system is set to be designed to be inclusive, in reality, in practice, it remains exclusive.
So, Mr. Mohale, as somebody who has served as an executive in multiple corporations in this country, and by and large, looking at these figures, you would have been in the minority, do you find that there are particular challenges that face black executives when they're in these roles that perhaps make it even more difficult for them to be able to sustain that presence and perhaps have greater longevity at that high level?
Absolutely, Mekethy. And I think being a beneficiary of patriarchy myself, it means that when I get into white corporate South Africa, there is a slightly better expectation that I am needed and wanted, and therefore I belong there, and the elements are such that I can indeed succeed. So it's these black men, these black executives that know what it is like to be out in the cold, who know exactly and understand the intersectionality amongst gender, race, and class, that their singular duty is to kick down the corporate doors and bring down the proverbial glass ceiling that has now become the proverbial concrete ceiling. That's our job. That's our job, that when we have a voice, we use it judiciously. When we are the CEOs and the chairpersons of the board, that we go out of our way to seek African women in particular, because they are the ones that are worse than being triply oppressed. We don't need government's permission to do that. That's what leadership is about. So when we took over as the chair of the Bidvest Group Limited, a 33-year-old company that has never had a woman as a CEO. In fact, when we took over, there was only one woman on the board. Her name was Nompumelelo Tembekile Madisa. 32 years into that, on the 1st of October last year, we decided as the board that we are going to make her the CEO. But even more importantly, we set her up for success. Now that she's been there for more than a year, when you look at the statistics, 80% of that board is black, 70% of it is African women. And you can understand why, because women know where the other women are. They know the good ones and not so good ones, but also they understand the trials and tribulations. They create an environment that is conducive for women to succeed. They support each other and one another. As a man, I wouldn't know what it takes to be a successful woman in corporate South Africa. But I had a glimpse, because for 8.5 years, when the group CEO of Shell Oil Products Africa, it's only when talking to women at the Dimension Data Campus in Bryanston that they said, imagine how productive I would be if you had only a crush on campus. Because at tea time, I can rush down and see my little one, and I could do the same at lunchtime. When we did that, the productivity of women alone went up 46%. When we said no meeting should start at 8 o'clock, but the earliest should be 9, because they prepare the young ones, they prepare the lunch boxes, they take them into their cars, drop one at this school and that school, and when they come late for an 8 o'clock meeting by 10 minutes, it's the men that look them funny and say, that's why they don't succeed, not understanding that the suits that they wiggled into were prepared by the same women. So I think when we put women in charge, not only do the companies become more profitable and more productive, effective and efficient, they command more multiples upon exit. They are the best companies to work for.
President of Business Unity South Africa, Bonang Mohale, and Chairperson of the Employment Equity Commission, Tabea Nkabinde, let me thank you both for your time tonight.